Just waiting for it to, waiting for the progress bar. There we go. Hello, everybody. My name is Joe Russo, and I'm the CEO of Palm Beach Tech, and we are here live with another and the last actual tech talk of this year. So thank you so much for everybody who's been tuning in and for everybody who's been taking part. Today, we're going to be having Christopher Kunney, the Chief Strategy and Business Officer at DSS, talk about the next generation of electronic health record technology. But just wanted to give a shout out to everybody who's on the call, of course. This is part of our mission to build South Florida into a tech hub. This event, everything that we do, all of the work that we put in, day out from our team, our volunteers, our board of directors, all feed into this mission. And we're so really excited that we have members that believe in this so much, like DSS, like Christopher, to be a part of this event and everything that we're doing. For those that have not seen, we do have a community creed. It says very simply that we are wholeheartedly committed to building a welcoming, collaborative, and inclusive community for all. We want all of our events, all of our community, all of our communications mediums to be completely open all of the time, 24/7 to anybody who wants to be a part of them. With that, I'll briefly go through these slides. We are a nonprofit organization. We have over 200 corporate members, including some of the largest and some of the most amazing companies here in South Florida, like Blue Green Vacations, United Kronos Group, Nextera Energy, Office Depot. And if you work at a company that's not on this list, I encourage you to talk to that company and have them become a member. Membership starts at $500 for a company or $100 for an individual. And there's so many awesome benefits. You can learn more at palmbeachtech.org. And for those that want to continue getting involved, we have all of these events going on, starting up again in 2021, thanks to our wonderful team and all of the great members that do take part to lend some of their knowledge and expertise. If you're looking for a job out there, this slide is for you. Go to palmbeachtech.org, and under the careers tab, you will see an opportunity to send your resume directly out to all of our members all at the same time. If you're looking for a job, there's no better way in South Florida in our tech industry to get your name out there. And with that, we do have a Slack channel. You can go to southfloridatech.com/Slack. It is a South Florida tech community channel, so you can take a look at all of the really great opportunities all fed into there, some great conversations and great discussions. And with that, I really want to thank our speaker for today, Christopher. We actually did a panel together, I think at the very beginning of this year, if I want to say right. So we kicked off the year together talking about technology and innovation at actually a Chamber of Commerce event. And now we're kind of ending the year on a similar note, talking about technology and innovation. And for those who have not met him before or learned much about what they do, Christopher is brilliant. The company has been a stakeholder in our tech industry for many years. And, real quick before we get to them as well, shout out to Carrie Stamp and Company, who sponsors our Tech Talk series and events. They're usually on, Kerry and his whole team, small financial advising company based in Jupiter, right around where DSS is based. And also in addition to that has a technology startup of their own. So with that, thank you, Kerry and Christopher. It's all your show, my friend. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Well, again, thank you everyone again for taking time out of your busy schedule and your evening to spend a little time with me and chat a little bit about technology and what's happening in the healthcare space. Let me share my screen here and we'll get going. Hold on one second. Okay, I would have here. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, we'll get started. Well, again, my name is Christopher Kunney. I am the Chief of Strategy and Business Development for DSS Incorporated. We're based in Juno Beach. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit today about next generation electronic health record systems. With the advent of COVID and all that's happening today and how healthcare is being impacted, I'm sure we all have felt the impact of the pandemic in some form or fashion. And we're also seeing how technology is having an impact on it as well, too. Just look at the vaccine that's been generated just within less than a year. I mean, it's amazing how technology is really impacting this market, and how, in particular, electronic health records have been impacting healthcare for almost 50 years. And so I want to touch a little bit on that. And so we'll cover a couple of things. I would be remiss if I didn't say a little bit about who we are as a company and what we're doing in this space. Also, I think it's important for me to give you a little bit of background, a little bit of history of electronic health records and how they've emerged. Talk about some of the challenges and insights that exist today in the market as it relates to these technologies, and then the fun stuff. Really talk about what's emerging and what's happening around technology and around virtual care. So DSS, we are based in Juno Beach, Florida. We have been around almost 3 decades, and we exclusively focus on the technology, healthcare technology industry. We have a number of offices in the South Beach area, as well as on the East Coast and in the Midwest. Our company has over 600 employees, and I won't give our revenue, but we are doing quite well overall. And we, again, have introduced a wide variety of technologies into this space. One of our largest customers today is the Veterans Administration. We literally have technologies in every VA hospital across the US, as well as we serve, again, a wide variety of other healthcare systems, both state as well as private sector-based companies. We've also, what I'm really excited about is we've taken the bold step in a very challenging market. We've taken a bold step to develop and bring to market here in the very near future what we believe is a next generation electronic health record system that we affectionately term Juno EHR. And for those of you, just so you know where the name came from, it actually wasn't based on Juno Beach. It's actually based on the goddess of a Greek god called Juno, which was a goddess of care. Juno EHR is again, comprehensive cloud-based solution. It was designed by clinicians for clinicians to address a number of the challenges and functionality issues that exist in today's EHRs from a clinical perspective, but also from a business perspective, scale in a way that's cost-effective for organizations who are challenged with the capital and resource requirements associated with some of the legacy solutions in the market today. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's jump into the talk. So a brief history about EHRs. Well, overall, EHRs have been around, as I stated, for almost 50 years. I mean, the very first one was created in 1965. And Mayo Clinic was one of the very first healthcare systems back then to embrace what they didn't call an EHR at the time. It was really just a data repository. It was a way of collecting information about patients and digitizing that in some form or fashion. And traditionally, it was back then and well into the 80s and early 90s, it was primarily used as an administrative and financial tool. It was to schedule patients, to process patient payments for reimbursement purposes, and to provide an electronic repository of the patient record. Up until, again, the late 90s, most clinicians still use paper records to get the results for the patient, to look at the patient's condition, to place orders. All of that was still done in a very manual fashion. It wasn't until, again, the late 80s, early 90s, where we started to see some potential opportunity and potential application to leverage these systems for clinical purposes. Even as early back as the 70s, you had companies like Eclipsys, Epic, Meditech, and others start to form their solutions with, again, a focus around the administrative components of it. And then, fast forward to the 80s and 90s, where healthcare organizations were traditionally leveraging best of breed technologies. So you had pharmacy systems that were best of breed, lab systems that were best of breed, scheduling systems, et cetera. And there became a need to start sharing information amongst those systems. I mean, so the scheduling system needed to be able to, patient information needed to come from that system into the pharmacy system or to the lab system or to the clinical documentation system. And so there was a need to start to build interoperability into these tools. And so the concept of data exchange started happening within the 80s and 90s, and which birthed Health Level 7 or HL7, which is it's affectionately termed. And it was really the protocol that was now being adopted by most healthcare organizations around the sharing of information between these disparate systems. And that took place and that became the de facto standard. And today, really, is still the standard way that information is shared and aggregated between these systems. It's emerged and evolved into other forms of HL7 like FHIR, but at its core, it's still the basic way that data is basically transferred back and forth between these systems. Then we started moving into, again, the late 90s and early 2000s, where we started building some level of intelligence into the systems, very rudimentary intelligence, where we could do things like medication management or medication reconciliation, where you could look at the different types of medications and determine if there may be a potential adverse reaction to those medications. You could flag certain results from lab and pharmacy, lab and radiology results to help you identify if there are certain thresholds or issues that need to be pointed out to the clinician. And it became more of a tool that the clinician could now use to make better decisions around the delivery of care. What has happened, what is starting to happen now with that evolution, it's moving from being a collector of data to now one that's becoming more of an advisor to the clinician. And so as we look at 2020 and beyond, with the advent of things like machine learning and AI, you can now take that information, and not only that information that's in that system, but information from a wide variety of sources, aggregate that information, and then advise or consult with the clinician to direct them or provide advice to them on how to treat a specific patient. And so you move further down a path of what they call precision medicine. So based on all sorts of determinants of health, social, political, research, otherwise, how can I now, as well as the patient DNA and vitals and all the other information that's relevant, how can I now leverage that data in a way that makes me a smarter clinician, that makes me be able to treat that patient based on their unique set of conditions? So let's talk about a little bit, now just got a little bit of history about where the industry has been and where it is today. Let's talk about, some of the players in the market today and how they're viewed. Over the past 20, 30 years or so, there have been a number of different players in the healthcare space. Some major corporations that, dominated this market in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that quite honestly no longer are major players. The McKessons, the GEs, the Allscripts and others of the world, Eclipses of the world, excuse me, were really dominant players, early on in this market. Their pharmacy systems, their radiology systems, their administrative processing systems were really the best of breed technologies that many of these healthcare systems acquired and used for some time. But when we started moving down this path of interoperability and tying these systems together and leveraging data in a more effective way, many of these organizations, unfortunately, weren't able to keep up with the demands of the industry. And so you've had a handful of organizations that now have emerged in the market. And some of them are listed here. For example, Epic really owns about 28% of the overall healthcare market. It's said that 60% of most healthcare records around the country, US, go through an Epic platform in some form or fashion. Their closest competitor in terms of overall percent of revenue of market share is Cerner. And Cerner, again, has been around just as long as Epic back in the late 70s, early 80s when they started emerging, and now have become a dominant player in the healthcare market. And then you have the other ones that round out that group, the Meditechs, the CPSIs, the Allscripts of the world, have smaller percentages of the market, but still are the dominant players in this space. What's interesting about, the fact that you've got only a handful of players that really dominate the market, there's still a lot of niche customers out there, niche vendors out there in different specialty groups. And so these are the companies that typically provide solutions to the acute care market, so the inpatient market. And when you look at other specialties like oncology or dentistry, ophthalmology, and other areas, specialties, you have niche players that typically dominate that market as well too. But these are the major guys. These are the big behemoths in the market today that really influence what's happening with the delivery of care through these systems. What's interesting about them, the overall kind of satisfaction rating around them, if you look at the scores there, they're shown by the number that the rankings there. Most of them don't get high marks. B's and C's and some D's, across the board for many of these systems. Epic by far is the one that has the highest score, and the only A they got is in loyalty. It's not necessarily in the product design. So there's still a tremendous amount of opportunity to improve these technologies. And if you look at the core functionality that's built into these technologies, it hasn't fundamentally, in the workflows that have been built into many of them, they haven't fundamentally changed a lot in the past 15, 20 years. Now that clinicians are starting to leverage them as a way that a tool that they use to treat patients, they're starting to see the gaps and weaknesses and frustrations around these tools. And so what's happening in the market today is really interesting. The pandemic is starting to really accelerate this, but it is something that's been emerging even pre-COVID-19. The industry is just really going through a rapid transformation. Healthcare organizations are trying to find ways to improve the delivery of care process, drive costs out of that, and increase quality and value. Start to specialize and cure specific illnesses, and focus on delivering care as much as possible outside of the four walls of the hospital. And how do we do that? How do we do that in an effective way? Well, technology has become a core component of that delivery of care. Long now has gone away the use of, for the most part, paper in the documentation of patient information, and the aggregation of that information in a way that allows them to make better decisions. So on-demand care is really this combination of leading clinical and consumer-based technologies and collaboration services. Consumers are now become much smarter about their delivery of care. They have access to technologies that are on their smartphones and on their wearable devices that are collecting information about their well-being. And there is an expectation now that our clinicians will start to leverage that information to understand their overall health. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned early on, many of these large monolithic systems, the cost of maintaining and managing them have just become cost prohibitive. When you look at some of those large scale implementations for some of the large healthcare delivery networks, many of them have literally had to double or triple their IT staff in order to maintain just this one platform. And so you've got an EHR, you may have started out, early on with a staff of 25 to 50 people. And now that I've implemented an electronic health record system, I've had to hire another 50 to, in some cases, 100 people to maintain an application of this type. Not to mention that these technologies are still, many of them are built on client server platforms, which still requires the hospital system to make an investment in that infrastructure, whether it's a data center or the servers, the network infrastructure, the security, all of those components that are now necessary to protect and secure and ensure reliability of that data. is now becoming very cost prohibitive for them to own and maintain, especially as you get outside of the major metropolitan areas and you move into the urban or the rural market where you've got critical access hospitals and small and rural hospitals that are working on razor thin margins in some cases operating in the red. They just can't afford the infrastructure costs associated with these technologies anymore, and they cannot even recruit the people who have the expertise to support them going forward. And so you've got, these key drivers that are now starting to happen in this space. Patients are demanding more access to their patient information. Other stakeholders like big pharma, payers, insurance companies, and other groups are now wanting access to this information as well. Now, digital applications that patients are using are helping them gain more real-time insight about their current condition. And they want their clinicians to have access to that information as well. And then legislators and legislate what they call kind of the political determinants of health are mandating the use of these technologies, the sharing of information, the securing this information, and moving away from what they call fee-for-service models to really quality of care models of the delivery of care. And so we need to leverage the data in a way that helps us gain better insights, not only about a specific individual, but about a broader set of a population so that we know how to treat them better. The other interesting thing that's happening in the market is that this concept around virtual care is continuing to grow and emerge. And the investment community is making huge investments in this market. You hear every day about, large companies that are acquiring technology. You see the Amazons, the Googles, the Walmarts, other non-traditional organizations getting into the healthcare space and acquiring companies and leveraging these platforms now to deliver care not only to their own employees, but to extend that beyond to a broader commercial market. And you can see that this growth will continue and be sustainable for quite some time. Over the next couple of decades, the widespread adoption of technologies used by consumers to manage their care will continue to grow. The integration of those technologies into tools like electronic health record systems will continue to be investments made in that, as well as the use of virtual care platforms. We as patients now post-COVID-19 are no longer going to want to go back to a traditional clinic to receive non-threatening life care when I can just have a video visit, a virtual visit, and get that same type of care delivered to me in the privacy of my home. I don't have to schedule half the day off to get to the clinic or my doctor's office to spend 2 hours waiting on that person and then 15 minutes with them. Those days now are fleeting away, and patients are demanding that their time is just as valuable as the physicians, and we want that care to be delivered in models that make sense to them. These legacy technologies, are really having a huge impact on things like clinician burnout. We'll talk a little bit about that today, later in the presentation. The technology EHR vendors overall have been slow to adopt many of these emerging platforms like cloud-based solutions and open architecture design. They were very protective of their intellectual property, and even healthcare systems for a number of years didn't want to share their patient records with another healthcare system down the street. And so there was just this kind of myopic view about the leveraging of data within our own four walls versus reaching beyond those four walls and gaining access to all points of data that can help me provide better care for my patients. And so now the federal government has started to mandate that sharing of data. Patients ourselves we have more than one doctor, one care provider, and we want them to have access to all of our records. And so we're demanding access to that information. And now clinicians, now that they're being required and have adopted these technologies, say, you got to build systems that make better sense for us. Now we're frustrated, these systems are, making it more difficult for me to do my job. And so our company actually had the opportunity conduct a survey in partnership with HIMSS, and HIMSS stands for Health Information Management Systems Society, and it's one of the largest healthcare IT associations, if not in the country, really in the world. It's really kind of the paramount association for learning about technologies in this space and certifying technologies and just gaining thought leadership in this space. And so our organization partnered with them to actually do a survey. When we were designing our system, we wanted to understand what are the, how do clinicians feel about the current electronic record systems that are out there today. And what was really interesting and somewhat alarming is that 9 out of 10 of them reported to us in our survey that the EHR is playing a contributing role into physician burnout or clinician burnout. If you look at the numbers, they're 10% are saying it's a primary contributor, 30% are major factor, and almost 50% one of many factors that exist. So literally 90% or more, almost over 90% of them are really frustrated with what's happening in this space. And the fact that these technologies have not kept up with their needs, and they are actually contributing to them being less impactful in the delivery of care. And then we asked, based on what's happening in the pandemic today, what are some of the specific factors that are causing that frustration and that dissatisfaction? Well, first and foremost, they're not intuitively designed. They're not designed that makes it easier for the clinician to enter information into the system and to access information from these systems. So the high number of clicks and interactions required to do routine tasks like documenting patient information or ordering, a procedure or ordering labs or, processing the patient in some form or fashion, looking at medications and reconciling those medications. The interoperability issues that exist, the fact that it's a challenge for me to get patient data from another EHR so I can look at what's happening there or to share that with colleagues. So these systems still have quite a bit of legacy built into them. And again, are creating this ongoing frustration, especially in the pandemic when you've got, hospitals that are busting at the seams with patients and are having to use these tools to try to track patients' current conditions, but yet they're spending all their time focused on the tool and not on the patient themselves. And so when these systems, it's really interesting, these monolithic systems are a huge barrier to change. Many of these healthcare technology companies make millions of dollars off of really the weaknesses in their systems. So the interoperability components of that, providing professional services to be able to tie these systems together, to provide support for these systems, to provide updates for these systems. Those are revenue models that benefit them based on the weaknesses in the platforms, which is really interesting. The fact that the gaps are where they're making a lot of their money. And so that barrier of change also is challenging too, because you've invested so much money in these systems. You don't want to move to another one that's not going to give you, any really leapfrog in functionality or cost savings or capabilities in the one you already have today. So it's kind of like the devil that you know. And when you think about this concept of what we call composable healthcare, that's really where the industry should be going now. When you think about a composable healthcare organization and what that really means, it's basically an organization that can reconfigure its capabilities. It can move when the industry moves. It changes with the pace of the industry. Healthcare is one of those few industries that it doesn't change quite a bit. I used to be a CIO for a healthcare system, and my CMIO, Chief Medical Information Officer, shared with me one day that he's a fourth generation physician, and his great-great-grandfather was in the Civil War, and he said, I actually had access to my great-great-grandfather's records, medical records. And he said, basically, we practice medicine the same way that my great-great-grandfather practiced it. They're basically the same way. We've now put electronics into it, technology into it, but the core functionality of it is not fundamentally changed. And that's where technology can now start to help leapfrog that by leveraging things like machine learning and AI and ambient-based technologies, et cetera, to help move us to the next level. where the technology is not just a repository of information, but it's actually helping us to make better decisions. And so when you think about, these monolithic IT design, and technology companies that really uh, build solutions that are pretty intuitive, you think about your cell phone, or some of the technologies you use by Google and Amazon, whether it's Alexa and other tools, doesn't require you to spend hours in class and training and retraining to learn how to use these technologies. I mean, even the ATM, you go to almost any ATM in the country or in the world, if you can read the language on it, you know how to use it. They're intuitively designed. You pick them up, the flow makes sense, the logic makes sense in them. Even technologies like Excel, you may not know how to do macros and some of the other intricate components of Excel, but you can do some basic, functions in it. You can create tables, you can do, calculations, et cetera, without a lot of training. But when it comes to EHRs, they fail, unfortunately, miserably in their current design. There's hours and hours of effort that are put into training clinicians. Many of them are not digital natives. They didn't grow up with these technologies, and so they're already not comfortable with them. They're used to using other resources to document for them, scribes and nurses and other clinicians, while they focus on the treatment of the patient. And now they're being forced to use these tools. And so they become very, very frustrated with these technologies. So now that you hear all the bad things or the challenges that exist in the market today, let's turn our attention a little bit to really, what does the next generation EHR looks like? So, there's a concept called this, a term, necessity breeds or drives innovation. COVID-19 has definitely been a catalyst to that. It's really accelerated the adoption of many of these platforms now. And so you've got healthcare providers and academic institutions and technology partners now starting to partner together to start to develop these next generation EHRs. And so the pandemic has really accelerated the adoption of things like virtual care. It's forced providers to scale up rapidly to do things like contact tracing and surveillance monitoring. AI is now being incorporated into these tools to help them make better decisions. And there's a true desire now to embrace technology as a transformative tool in the delivery of care. So virtual care platforms, as I mentioned earlier, telemedicine. Telemedicine has grown exponentially this past year. This year, by the end of 2020, the U.S. telemedicine market will surpass 20 million users of that service this year. When you think about, that just in 2019, it was roughly about 21 million users. And now we've literally had 100% full of increase in the number of users that will continue to have used that technology. And although you may see a downturn in the market slightly as we start flattening the curve and people want to start interacting with each other on a regular basis again, that platform in and of itself will continue to grow exponentially. It's predicted to be, by 2023, 60 million people in the US will actively be using telemedicine as their form for primary care for non-critical, non-invasive types of services. And so where is the EHR evolving to? It's evolving to really what we call kind of a healthcare network or a healthcare platform. When you think about technologies like ERP technologies or CRM technologies that have moved to these kind of cloud-based platforms, healthcare is really the natural evolution to that similar type of platform, primarily because you've got a broader set of stakeholders now that are wanting access to that information and to provide information back to ultimately the person that's most important, and that's the patient. And so whether that's remote virtual care, whether that's research by pharma and other types of medical device companies, or your your team of clinical care professionals that you deal with, whether it's, you've got a rheumatologist, a radiologist, a cardiologist, a primary care physician, and other behavioral health. They all want access to your patient information, as well as you want to access to it yourself. And then technologies like clinical analytics and AI diagnostic tools will start to aggregate not only that patient information, but patient information from research studies, from pharma studies, from a wide variety of sources, and use that data in a way that allows them to, again, to be a digital kind of consultant or advisor to the clinician, as well as the federal government wants now access to this information to do, again, things like surveillance monitoring and develop policies and procedures that drive the political determinants of health. And so Gartner has what's called a hype cycle, for those of you who might be familiar with Gartner. And basically what they talk about is all technologies go through a journey, a process of their initial stage through till they become kind of standard technologies. When you think about the cell phone, just 20 years ago, the fact, or 20, 25 years ago, the fact that, we were still using payphones and regular dial-up phones. And now we can't even imagine not having those technology at our fingertips. And so the hype cycle for healthcare in the initial era of EHRs was this tool being used for documentation, primarily for revenue driving purposes, revenue cycle purposes, but also to collect information like pharmacy and lab results, PACS imaging results. It became a tool to electronically house that information. Over time, we started building some intelligence into those platforms, and we started digitizing what we call evidence-based medicine. We use core clinical trials and research that said that certain outcomes, certain procedures will deliver certain outcomes, and we started to program that into these technologies. Or certain drugs have certain interactions, negative interactions with others. And so we were able now to programmatically develop these tools to take those things into account, which helped the clinician become a smarter clinician and to hopefully reduce some of the patient errors that occur today. And now, as we move into kind of the next eras of healthcare, where the technology is now becoming a colleague to us, we're using things like population disease management tools and technologies, and precision medicine, and AI and what we call kind of the digital clinician. So the AI now becomes, another provider in the delivery of care, that advisor going forward. And it's really interesting to see that journey that's happened over the past couple of decades. I mean, just been this accelerated growth towards evidence-based medicine, and now this accelerated growth towards virtual care and precision medicine. And then overall, that technology, it's still, evidence-based medicine is still kind of the core technology today in most of the EHRs, but we're slowly starting to move towards this concept of the colleague and the mentor. For example, and I know this is probably small to read on the screen here, and so don't worry about that. I just want to point out a couple of technologies that are starting to emerge. The ambient digital scribe technologies, the Alexas of the world, are now becoming integrated into the EHR. And so now that when I walk into the exam room and the clinician walks in there with me, he or she doesn't have to sit there and focus on entering data into the laptop or the computer on wheels. The system is actually listening to our conversation and capturing the relevant information needed to create the clinical note. I can also give it instructions and tell me to pull up their last radiology results, or order this particular medication, or schedule this specific test. The technology now with AI built behind it is allowing the clinician to have an assistant, a digital assistant that works with them to treat the patient while they do what they do best, which is focus on those political and social determinants of care, working closely with the patient to understand and comfort them when they need comforting, and have that human touch that's still required when you treat patients. How many of us have walked into an exam and the clinician that's spending more time with their head down in the computer versus looking at us and, understanding what our specific needs might be? Well, these technologies now are starting to emerge and will start to close some of those gaps. This digital health platform that we just talked about will now extend the reach of the technology beyond just the core capabilities of the EHR. And so now best of breed technologies, things like IoT devices that are doing remote patient monitoring, clinicians who now can treat multiple patients, from their home or from one setting without having to travel to multiple hospitals or travel to multiple clinics to see patients. Those technologies are now being integrated into the next generation EHRs. And then ultimately, this focus around precision medicine and using tools that allow us to create these digital twins, these representations of the person that helps us understand their specific issues versus, a generic patient that comes into their practice or into the hospital. And so at the core of that, if you look at this kind of emerging technology, and I like to think of the EHR as kind of like the next generation, it's very similar to Salesforce and Office 365 and some of those technologies that are now platforms that are repositories of information that other technologies sit on top of. That allow you to do things like e-visits and online education and having a patient portal and integrating your wearable devices into these systems, as well as capturing data, the actual electronic patient record, and to perform the normal functions around revenue cycle management and capturing lab results and other services that are needed within the general hospital setting. But then it extends those capabilities well beyond that. But at the core of that is that platform, is that technology that allows you to do things like population disease management, precision medicine, et cetera. And I know this is another very busy slide, but what it's saying is that when you think about the healthcare ecosystem and the different components of it, health services users, delivery care networks, clinical staff, the Internet of Things. There are all these different components that are built into that model that are now emerging or currently being used today. And so the orchestration of care is now being delivered through a platform that allows the patient and consumer to have access to it. It allows virtual care to take place and allows the traditional clinical environment between the brick and mortar to have access to information and make sense out of the information. And so all these things start to emerge in this platform now. And so at the end of the day, the EHR is still a very foundational component of it, but it's a component of a broader set of services and solutions that are now emerging and being delivered through our platforms. And so again, when you think about what's happening through this hype cycle and what's becoming now standard delivery of care, remote patient monitoring is being done all over the place now today. It's not emerging technologies anymore. It's actually being leveraged on a day-to-day basis within the clinical setting. But what's leapfrogging that is now this whole concept of virtual visits. This time next year, we won't think, second thought about getting a virtual visit. It'll be a normal thing we do. And it will, be a part of the business model for many healthcare organizations going forward. And then the whole concept of that is now emerging around e-visits and this enterprise virtual platform that we just talked about that helps to support that e-visit model. And then these digital clinical encounters that occur, and ultimately AI that helps to support the virtual health assistant. And now you may find in the next 3 to 5 years that you'll have an interaction with a virtual health assistant, and you may never even have a human interaction about certain treatments that you receive. It's all based on information that's already collected about you and information that you shared, and then the analytics built behind it to treat you going forward. The other thing that's emerging, and what's really interesting, is about all the other technology companies that are starting to be leveraged in this environment today. Again, COVID and this whole what they call touchless society or touchless platforms. How do we continue to collaborate, communicate, or receive consultations without having to be in the presence of another individual? And so technologies like Zoom and Teams and Slack and others are now being adopted aggressively by healthcare organizations to communicate with their colleagues, to communicate with their patients, for patients to communicate with the community of people that may have a similar condition that they're dealing with. It's really an exciting time to see these things happen. And so this whole, again, concept of virtual care today, we're at some of the applications of it. And the greatest applications today, and we'll see this emerge over time with other applications, but cardiovascular disease, again, patient monitoring. Cardiomobile is a great example of that, where you can actually do an EKG, on your cell phone. Skin care, dermatology care, being able to get consultations that way, the treatment of diabetes. We even have someone who's on the call tonight who talked about their technology they're bringing to market to manage hypertension through mobile and IoT platforms. And one of the greatest opportunities and most impactful opportunities is around behavioral health. No longer now do I have to, if I say I'm a wounded warrior coming back home and I live in a small rural community that I'm dealing with post-traumatic stress, I don't have to drive 50 miles to the closest, behavioral health organization to receive care. I can get behavioral care, mental health care right in the comfort of my own home. These technologies have now emerged as a part of these platforms to support these services. ICU, critical care now can be managed remotely. And so I can be a remote ICU doctor and I can be managing multiple ICUs in multiple hospitals through the use of these technologies. And one that's really having a huge impact is around neurology and stroke diagnosis, being able to treat patients in those critical moments up to the stroke actually occurring, where there's certain things you can do to reduce the impact of that stroke if you catch them early enough in the cycle. And then finally, what's exciting to me as well is that companies that are starting to really drive this evolution. It's to some degree, it is some of these traditional EHR companies, but to a greater degree, it's the non-traditional companies that are driving this change. The Microsofts, the Salesforces of the world, the Walmarts of the world, the Amazons of the world that are really looking at the technologies that they brought to market in other verticals and asking, how do we apply that to healthcare? How can healthcare benefit from these types of solutions to integrate technologies, to leverage AI platforms, to allow the consumer to better manage their care through the use of tools that we've already built in other verticals? And then finally, as we wrap up the conversation, we asked again, for the next generation EHR, and we like to think that with Juno EHR, we're building this as well. What are some of the key factors that you want to see in your next generation EHR going forward? Well, as I stated before, intuitive design, workflow optimization. It shouldn't take me a college degree to learn how to navigate an EHR, and hours of education to be able to do that. And still, when I walk out of that classroom, I'm still confused about how to maximize the use of this tool. Not intuitive design. The integration of technologies like virtual scribe and ambient voice technologies and AI, integrating with these broader IoT platforms and cloud-based platforms like telemedicine. Building clinical decision support, looking at things like social determinants of health in the design of the technology. And then being able to leverage best of breed technologies that don't have to be initially built in my solution. If I want to integrate a third-party application that wasn't a part of your core system, I should be able to do that. I should be able to share this data with a wide variety of constituents that have a need and access to it as well. And so it's exciting to see these disruptive technology companies come into the market and start to solve some of these problems for clinicians and for us as patients. And again, DSS likes to think that we're on that cutting edge as well too. And hopefully here in the near future, you'll start hearing more about what we're bringing to market as well. And so in closing, thank you. I just want to thank everyone from Palm Beach Tech Association for giving me an opportunity to just offer this perspective on what's occurring in the market today, what the possibilities are. So for all of you who are not traditionally a part of the healthcare market, but you've got some really interesting and cool technologies that you think are applicable to the market, we encourage you to get involved, bring those technologies to market. This is the perfect time to do it, because this is one of the first times in the evolution of healthcare that we're very receptive and open to looking at these types of platforms to improve the quality of care. So with that, I will end my presentation. I will stop sharing, and I will see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Christopher. And we did have a few comments throughout here. Dennis, thank you so much, I think, for your whole history there too in the chat as Chris was talking. If anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if you'd like to, you can actually take yourself off mute. I'm totally cool with that as well. Everybody was saying you shared a wealth of information there, so that's why we might not have immediate questions.
A lot to share in a short period of time.
Yeah, Sarah says, thank you, very informative. Dennis said, Christopher covered a wealth of material, has moved forward, but definitely an area where South Florida Tech can continue to move it forward with so many medical facilities nearby. Actually, Dennis used to work with IBM, so in the chat he was talking about working on some health stuff with IBM in the late 90s and 2000s. So of course I'm summarizing what's in the chat, but.
Absolutely. I know one of the things we've been talking about through the association is really starting to establish a community of healthcare tech companies. When you think about the South Florida region, this whole concept around silver tech or age tech is what I affectionately call it. When you think about the demographics within the South Florida region, folks who are senior citizens, every day 10,000 people turn 65. And that will be happening for the next couple of decades. And so you got a whole industry that is developing around technology for senior citizens. How do you keep them independent? How do you monitor their care? How do you provide technologies that prevent catastrophic issues from occurring, like falls and heart attacks and strokes? We had one person again on here today who was talking about their monitoring technology for hypertension. I mean, those are technologies that continue to evolve in the market, and that region is really ripe for the cultivation of these types of platforms.
I agree, and
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, go ahead, James. You want to say something?
Sure. I used to work at another company, another healthcare business that deals with treating drug addictions, where I was developing an application where it keeps patients' records of all of our patients admitted to our facilities. And we were very small, and we were finding ways on how to store records and keeping them safe, just in case if something bad happens to the facilities and it could damage the servers. What would be your recommendation for keeping the records safe? Like, do you keep them in other cloud services, or do you keep them on servers at the facilities?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's quite honestly one of the challenges and concerns that many IT leaders within healthcare have about moving to the cloud, because many of them who kind of grown up in the industry felt like, if I can't control the data within my four walls, how do I protect it? How do I take accountability to that? And so I want to have my own data center. I want to have all my own security infrastructure to protect the data within those four walls. But what you're finding is that cyber criminals are much more sophisticated than most of the local healthcare leaders, healthcare organizations. They find backdoors, they find social not media, but social ways of getting people to give up access to their systems, to find the vulnerabilities into those systems. And what you find is that many of them cannot afford to protect this information, which is quite honestly most valuable information on the black market right now is a patient record. They cannot afford to protect this data from these very sophisticated cyber criminals. But companies like Amazon, companies like Google and Microsoft, they deal with that every day. I mean, they can invest millions of dollars and hire millions of professionals or thousands of professionals who have expertise in managing and securing data. And so my suggestion has always been, recommendation has always been to partner with those organizations who specialize with that. One of the things what happens is when you enter into healthcare and you now have access or responsibility for patient records, then you're governed under, being a business associate. So you have just as much responsibility for that as anyone else. And someone just posted blockchain as well too. I mean, it's an emerging technology that into healthcare, it's an emerging technology, but that's one of those areas and one of those ways that, we can start to find ways to secure that patient data. And so that's why, again, those who have solved that problem in other verticals should bring those best practices into healthcare and help us adopt what we might think is emerging technology, but has become a de facto standard for many other organizations like cryptocurrency and the financial markets.
Very good. And I did see one other question in there, which I think because we're a little over time already, this is probably the last question we'll be able to take, but I did see about the blockchain, but I think you just answered that question, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're starting to see more and more companies invest in blockchain. There's tremendous opportunity there. But healthcare is traditionally slow to adopt what would be considered standard technologies, what we're considering emerging technologies. But that's where the opportunity exists for people like yourself to bring those solutions to the table and show us how we can take advantage of them.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I appreciate the wonderful presentation all the time here tonight. And thank you everybody for joining. And Chris, also, if you have either your presentation or any one of the specific slides or links or anything that you want to share resource-wise, we're going to be sending out a follow-up email to everybody that's RSVP'd, including the recording. So if you've got anything to share, we'll make sure to get that out to the community as well.
Absolutely. I'll make sure you have the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
and thank you so much,
for your
everybody.
time. Absolutely. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.